Hello, and welcome to my talk about using data for my backyard garden to teach introductory data science. My name is Lisa Ledway, and I teach statistics and data science at Macalester College. So welcome to my garden. Before I talk about how I use my data from it in my intro data science course, I want to tell you a little bit about how my garden came to be. I started gardening in the summer of 2004, the first year I had a house with a backyard. I don't have a picture from back then, but here's one from 2013. Perhaps it gives you a sense of why I fondly refer to it as the jungle garden. In 2017, my family and I moved. So in 2018, I needed to start fresh. We made boxes for raised beds and built a fence to keep all the rabbits out. I laid a lot of bricks for paths. By May of 2019, things were really shaping up and my forearms were really sore from lifting all those bricks. This photo is from June 2020 with the garden just starting to bloom. I love spending time in my garden. And this new one has lived up to the jungle garden name of its predecessor. The pumpkin and squash arch is my favorite feature and is abuzz with bees most of the summer. It's fairly productive too. I preserve and eat as much as I can and share with others too. That's zucchini bread, if you're wondering. Last year, I harvested nearly 1,000 pounds of food from the garden, which reminds me, I'm supposed to be talking to you about using the data in my class. Let's get to that. Sometime in the spring of 2020, I realized that I could combine my love of my garden with my love of data by collecting data about my garden to use in my intro data science course. And why did I think this was a good idea? Well, first of all, I could use the data to introduce almost every topic I intended to teach in my intro data science course. Topics include data visualization, so bar charts, histograms, line graphs, scatter plots, box plots, just to name a few. Data wrangling, so things like creating new variables, summarizing data, joining, rearranging, string manipulation, etc. Adding animation and interactivity to graphs, including creating shiny apps, importing data, and creating nice tables. The two places where I didn't use my garden data were creating maps and scraping data, but in the future, I intend to try to do that. I know I'm biased, but I thought using this data was fairly interesting. Also, something I didn't realize initially was the personal connection it would bring. Students could ask questions about data collection that they couldn't usually ask about the data we use in class, since I had collected and curated it. So why not give it a try? And how did I use it? Well, literally, I put it in a Google Sheet and later in an R package. That's how we access the data. And then how did we actually use the data? Well, I just told you a few things and I'm going to illustrate those momentarily. And then I also use this in an assignment called the Perfect Garden Graph assignment. And I'll talk to you more about that later. I'm going to jump over to RStudio in a moment, but wanted to at least introduce the main data set here. It's called Garden Harvest. And each row is a harvest for a variety of vegetables. So vegetables might have multiple rows on a day, especially if there are things I eat twice a day, like lettuce, or if there are a lot of varieties, like tomatoes. Okay, I'm going to do a brief demo in RStudio, just showing you some examples. And then I will also link to my course website in my resources. And I'll link to my GitHub page, which will have even a couple more examples than what I have time to show you. So I'm going to share my RStudio. So here I've listed the libraries you'll need if you're using RStudio. And again, I can't go through all these examples, unfortunately, there's not time. So I'm just going to show you a few places we use it. So data visualization. We make histograms. Here's a histogram showing the distribution of tomato harvests in grams. They learn to do some customization of their plots. So here's that same plot with just a little pizzazz to it, I guess. They learn to create bar graphs, and I'm going to improve on this bar graph in just a little bit. They learn to make line graphs. So here's a line graph showing the daily tomato harvest in pounds on dates when tomatoes were harvested. And you can see that at the beginning, I provide some code to the students, and then there's code that they write. That's because they will not have done this sort of data wrangling piece yet. They learn how to make box plots. So this compares the distribution of harvest weights for a subset of vegetables. And then they learn some data manipulation. So one nice thing is that by this time, they've already seen some of this in some of the example code that I've written for them. So they learn how to filter data. Here they learn how to filter data with multiple filtering criteria. So filter the vegetables, tomatoes, and cucumbers for dates after August 10th, 2020. They learn how to add new variables to a data set. So here we've added 2 new variables, weight in pounds, and a logical variable saying whether the harvest was over a pound or not. They learn how to summarize the data by various groups. So here they filtered to tomatoes and then summarized the daily weight. They learned some more advanced data manipulation as well. So things like working with strings. So here we see we took that same sort of ugly bar plot we had before, and we capitalized the first letter of each vegetable. And then here, they also learn how to reorder categorical data. So taking that same plot and now ordering it from most to least frequent. I'm going to really breeze through these ones. You should look in more detail later, but they also learn about joining data sets. So I do have multiple data sets they can use. One has the when I planted each vegetable, so I can do things like find the days since the vegetable was, the number of days since I planted the vegetable that they were first harvested. And they learn things like rearranging a data set, pivoting, or transposing, you might call that. And there's so many more. Again, I encourage you to go look at the website. So I am going to share back my presentation. Oops. Okay. And the last thing I want to talk to you about is the perfect garden graph assignment. So here's the description, which I'll read. Each week, you will submit a graph using my garden data. For this graph, you should ask the question of the data and then create a graph to answer that question. You will get feedback from me each week and we'll build on your previous graph. So you don't create a completely new graph each week, but rather continue to improve on the same graph over the entire course. This assignment will focus on the details of the graph that we don't usually have time for in weekly assignments. It will also be about writing nice code and annotating it. And I'm going to show you a couple examples from my students who gave me permission to share their work. So let's first talk about Chloe. So she wanted to know the average harvest size for the different vegetables. She started by plotting the raw data. My feedback was one idea would be to make the actual point smaller and lighter colored, and then put the average harvest size on top of that, maybe even using a different shape and color. So put the average on top of the raw data that she already plotted. Instead, Chloe only plotted the averages, and then she actually wrote me a little note about what she intended to do. And my feedback was, for this week, just stick with the averages, order the vegetables from largest to smallest average, and make the points a different color, but all the points the same color. Capitalize the first letter of the vegetable name using a stringer function. And she took all my feedback and did exactly what I said, which was really great. And now my feedback was, yes, I'm liking how this is looking. Now put the weight in pounds or kilograms, since they are pretty large numbers. Eliminate the horizontal grid lines. Instead of plotting the raw data with it, which I had initially suggested, try coloring or sizing the points by the number of harvests of each vegetable. And she did that, which was great. And this week, my feedback was, great. If you want to just change the size of the point, use this size argument in geom point. She had used it in the wrong spot. And I also suggested that instead of finding the number of harvests, let's find the number of days that each vegetable was harvested. So she took that feedback and again, did exactly what I said. I gave her a little bit more feedback, which was to change the title of harvest quantity to days harvested, which is a little bit more accurate. And I think she did a few more things, and this was her final plot. So kind of going from this initial plot to this final plot. The next example I want to show you, I'm not going to go through all that detail, but it starts right here. And then her last plot actually ends up as a set of two right here. So that's the last plot. And last but not least is Will. And I've just showed you his first and last plot. And I really appreciate that in the last plot, he sort of included, oops, sorry about that. He included this image of the tomato going along there, which I think is cute, but still preserves the integrity of the graph. So all in all, the perfect garden graph was a really great assignment. It allows me to give small amounts of feedback at a time. So you probably noticed I was telling them usually 1 to 3 little things or maybe one big thing to work on. They can work on those details that they don't always have time for, like how to align the title and whether or not to include grid lines. And they have fun doing it. So I've gotten a lot of student feedback saying that both that they enjoyed it and that they learned a lot from it. So that is my talk. Thank you for listening, and be sure to check out the resources I will include. Thank you.